All right, and lastly today, we'll like to cover the life of Mordecai Ham. Very simple last name. Mordecai. Mordecai Ham. There's a nice biography here, brief biography, in November 1st of this day in Baptist history about the life of Mordecai Ham. But he was an evangelist who was called, quote, the thorn in the devil's side. He was a fervent revival preaching evangelist. He was born in 1877 and died in 1961. Had a 60-year ministry. He was one of the most prominent evangelists in the first half of the 1900s. All but 2 years of his life were spent in evangelism. And through the course of those revival meetings and evangelistic outreaches and campaigns, they estimate 1/3 people were saved through his work. Mordecai Ham, by his testimony, was called to preach at the age of 9 years old. By the age of 16, he was serving as the Sunday school superintendent in his home church. His father was a pastor. His grandfather was a pastor. But neither of them had much money. He was born and reared here in rural Kentucky. Named after his grandfather, he was a pastor of Bethlehem Baptist Church in Kentucky. His grandfather pastored for 40 years. We don't know how he did it. Both the essay here on Mordecai Ham and my notes, not sure how his father, Mordecai Ham's father, did this, but somehow, quote, he pastored 14 churches, 5 of which he helped to establish, baptized 1,500 people, and married 800 couples. I think that means he presided over the wedding of 800 couples. So if you go back to the 1800s and the frontier situation in Kentucky, the situation most likely is that churches would be visited not weekly by the itinerant preacher, but every 4, 5, or maybe even 6 weeks during that time, and he had the oversight of multiple churches. Maybe, I don't know how the preaching went. If it was midweeks, I don't know. But he was a busy man, and he was a poor man. He'd given his life for this. He wasn't going to make much money off of that. And so, again, at the age of 16, he was made the Sunday school superintendent, Greenwood, Kentucky. Two things got through to Mordecai Ham that he says. One, he says there was a nightly revival at the Ham family altar. That's the term he used, family altar. He said we had a nightly revival there with my dad. Family devotions. And it was his mother's Christian character. That's the two things. He said, put a burning in his heart to preach. Very much lacking in education, did some self-learning, and he did some self-learning And after he got this urge to preach, somewhere along the line, he started to ponder his dad's and his grandfather's financial situation. And he said, let me get some money before I really live the life that they are living. Let me build up a little nest egg, because to him the ministry was people, but it was no finances. So he studied law on his own, too young to enter school for it. So he began to be a traveling salesman with a grocery firm company. Then, from 1897 to 1900, from the age of 20 to age 23, he moved to Chicago and tried his hand at managing a photographic company. He wanted to push back this call to preach. He wanted to do it on his time. He wanted to delay. He threw the rod down, right? And he had picked it up by the head, right? I don't think we're ever going to forget that illustration, are we? He picked it up by the head. He wanted to be in control. So this is what he did from the age 18, 19, 20, 21, 23. He wanted to get that, he wanted to be financially secure before he did what he knew he was supposed to do. Then, February 28th, 1899, his grandfather died. And Mordecai Ham, quoting here, witnessed the serenity of the old man of God, and on that occasion his father and many others prayed that his grandfather's prophet's mantle would fall on young Mordecai in his early 20s. And it did. In 1900, the year 1900, he got married, and then he did something interesting. He devoted himself to preach, but what he did, he placed himself for a certain time period under a very strict reading schedule. And he read extensively. You can see what he read. He read Old Testament survey books, New Testament survey books. He read the works of Josephus. He read books on preaching. I forget the number, but a number of books. He made the list out, and he disciplined himself to read through all those books so he could be well-read and prepared here for this preaching ministry that he had. In 1905, a sad event took place to him. His first wife died of cerebral meningitis. Mordecai Ham, remember what state I said he was from? From Kentucky. He had met a young lady who he was completely overtaken with and smitten with after the death of his wife. At first he thought that he would just live out his years like the Apostle Paul. But then he met a young lady who he just absolutely fell in love with. She was 14 years old. So, in prudent wisdom, he waited until she turned 15 to get married to her. And they were married for 50 years. Don't get any ideas at the lunchroom today. Who are the ninth graders over there again? Because I'm going to have kind of had a little struggle here with these freshmen, sophomore in college. But I'm thinking over there I might be able to trick somebody over there. I'll wait till they're in 10th grade, though, you know. I want them to grow up a little bit. I want them to at least get through algebra, because I don't want to be helping them with that. Now, geometry in 10th grade, that's all right. About that. Hey, what can I say? They were married for 50 years. He was from Kentucky. What to say? That's just what happened, all right? History. Painfully honest sometimes, is it not? Well, after he finished his reading, his dad took him to a meeting of lots of the pastors, called an associational meeting, Baptist pastors, and he preached, and they heard the fire of the Lord as well as content in that preaching, and so these pastors began to invite him to come to their churches, and as he went to this church, then as the word spread, and so what happened is the rest of his life, he never one time lacked for an invitation to go and preach in churches. Just kind of spread like that. And he did spend much of his time in the South. He established one main motive for his life, and he stated, "My goal in this life is to glorify my Lord Jesus Christ," period. That was his goal. He said, there's two things I'm not going to ever allow to occupy my mind. There's two things that I'm not letting in. Number one, past victories. And number two, desire for present popularity. He just went into the ministry with those two things. I'm not going to rely. I'm not going to revel in past victories. And I'm going to fight the desire for present popularity. He's very much against entertainment evangelism. It just was. He took stands against anything that was wrong. Moonshiners, right? Prohibition time period here. His meetings were often protests. He got his head gashed open one time by a group of moonshiners that threw things at him as he would preach against them. His goal was, when he go to an area, his goal was to shut it down, to dry the county out when he went there to preach. So he was popular. He drew a crowd, and he drew the protesters just the same. He really fought the liquor traffic, and the liquor traffic leaders spread really nasty rumors about him. But 9 southern states voted to go dry during the time of his preaching. He preached and practiced ecclesiastical separation. In the 1920s, he was known for defending the Bible against evolution and modernism or liberalism that was coming in during that time period. And he hated what he saw as the growing machinery that he called it of the Southern Baptist Convention, where the churches were just becoming machines of the Southern Baptist Convention. They told you what missionaries you're going to support. They told you what your Sunday school curriculum was going to be. They told you where your money was going to go. And they all just followed a lot. He preached against that, and he fought that. One night, all night long in Salisbury, North Carolina, the liquor crowd chanted, "Hang Ham, hang Ham," while he was there for his revival meeting. Secrets of the ministry of Mordecai Ham. They're not secrets. You're finding these often traits are across the board with many men. But number one, he kept the Bible central in his preaching. In his preaching, the Bible was central. Secondly, was a desire to be a man of great prayer. And thirdly was a love for souls. He preached against the liquor crowd. He preached against the growing charismatic movement. He said that it was paving the way for the Antichrist. He said that these faith healers were also paving the way for the Antichrist. He said this about people that tried to be moral without repenting of their sin and coming to Christ. He said this: any morality that doesn't come to the cross is a farce. It's fake. It's not real. Mordecai Ham became friends with J. Frank Norris, who we will speak of here, and Lord willing, in the next class period or two. We only have 2 more after this, by the way. So I had to push aside a lot of people that we'd like to talk about. But we will deal with J. Frank Norris. And him and Mordecai Ham became friends. In fact, Norris recognized Ham's love for souls, and Norris wanted Ham to join him on his staff, which Mordecai Ham refused to do. Today, the name Mordecai Ham, most of the time when someone knows something about him, he's known not because of his ministry, because of a very famous person that he saw saved at one of his revivals, and that person is Billy Graham. In 1935, Billy Graham came forward at a Mordecai Ham revival and made a decision for the Lord there. Last thing we'd say about Mordecai Ham is another motto that he followed for his life. And that motto was this: love all men, fear no man. Love all men, but fear no man. Challenging, interesting, exciting life of Mordecai Ham, evangelist for 60 years, 58 years in evangelism.